You're listening to More Than Reports, and I'm your host, Paul B. Felix.
Welcome to episode 4 of our data architecture series. Last time we explored staging areas, and today we're moving forward to discuss operational data store. Learn about the power of operational data store as well as their limitations.
Paul, we've been talking for 4 episodes already about the many different ways anyone can go about building data solutions. We've been using the term data architecture. When we go out to build this, it's not a straight path. That was the first conclusion we arrived at. There are many ways of getting there to the best possible state in data analytics, and we've been talking about the different possibilities there. We talked about system of record reporting, meaning you report directly from your transactional systems. We talked about staging areas where you have a less strict way of storing your data, but typically you would have a little more structure. So as you can see, we are going in this increasing levels of what is it, Paul? Strictness, complexity, cost. So where would we go next if we said, well, staging is not getting me where I want to be? Is this more complexity? Is this more power? What is this next step called?
Yeah, so if we, again, the principle being, let's do the simplest thing possible, with the benefit of knowing what our immediate requirements are and hopefully some insight into what we might think we want to do in the near term, the future. And if system of record reporting isn't adequate, staging isn't adequate, well, then what do we do? What's the next level up? Like you said, in complexity, it would be an operational data store. Just to recap, a staging area is just simply copying data from these systems of record, your business systems, and placing it in this intermediate data store, which we're calling a staging area. We're not really manipulating that data. We're just copying it. So the problem we were solving there is taking the load off of the source system. We're solving problems like simple connectivity to source systems. We can probably overcome that in some cases. And we also talked about solving the issues related to how systems behave, overwriting data in place, deleting data, that sort of thing. So staging can solve those problems. But when you get to a situation where you have to start manipulating data, you've got to do something else. Again, this is all about reviewing this cross-section between your analytical complexity and your source system complexity. If you think of that in a matrix, columns and rows, well, the intersection of that is what's going to tell you which data structure is the appropriate data structure. So an ODS gets us to that next level. It is more complicated by nature. It does have additional cost involved. It does require additional skill. So again, we don't want to go to this step unless we absolutely need to, but it's not uncommon that we would need to get here.
So where, I have my staging area, I'm happy. And, I think we could easily get there imagining a stepwise process, right? We start simple. We say, well, there are limitations with super simple. As most things in life, you can always get better. And staging felt really good. I'm not overburdening my transactional system anymore. I have all my data here. I even have a database. Where would it come short that I'd say, well, it turns out I need a little bit more?
Yeah, it's really about the transformation, I think, is the key factor here. Let me try to come up with an example. Well, let's just say that you have multiple data sources, a couple of data sources. One of them is your internal CRM system, let's say, and you want to combine that with data that is collected from an external source, weather data, census data, financial data, whatever it is. We're going to integrate that to give us some insight, whatever, to figure out who the best prospects are to go after. And it's not a straightforward type of situation where you can just say, this person lives in this city. Well, that city has this population. that's kind of a simple type of I guess integration of these two data sources. It's more complicated. Maybe we need to apply some type of business logic. Maybe there's an algorithm that needs to be applied to weight customers based on past activity or prospects based on their past activity, so we can score them. There's all kinds of business situations that require us to actually enhance data or transform data, and basically it's anything beyond what the source system is directly telling us. If we have to perform some type of manipulation to that data, well, that's going to happen somewhere along this pipeline between the source system and the deliverable. Well, let's just say it's a report in this case. So an ODS is a possibility for solving that problem. You can perform transformations, you can create new data structures, you can integrate data, you can create subject areas. You can do basically anything you want to do in an operational data store, because it's kind of like the name is implying. It's just a data store. And I know we're going to get into what is an operational data store, but that's basically the problem that it solves is dealing with those transformations and more complicated business rules.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think it's clear to me. Staging is raw data. It is outside of transactional systems, but it's just data as it shows up for you, right? I mean, as you get it out of whatever source it comes from, it sits there, and you can do with it whatever you want. We talked about just giving it to BI tools, reporting delivery tools that can just they themselves sometimes will fill gaps in transformation, like you said, right? I can try
Right.
and in those tools do business logic. I can do new metrics, derive metrics, and calculated measures. It does get complicated when you try to merge or bring together heterogeneous sources. Like you said, you may have a CRM that you want to match with sales or production, and therein lies more complexity.
Yes.
But how is ODS better than the next step up, or different? Not better. How is ODS that different from what would be the next step up? Why would you even create that stage before we get to, I guess, the ultimate power in analytics, analytical capabilities, which would be a data warehouse?
Right. Uh, that's an interesting question. I think. To figure that out, we got to talk about what is an operational data store. So let's address that for a second, because that is not a cut and dry answer, in my opinion. You can go and Google operational data store, and you'll quickly see there's no consensus on what an operational data store is.
That's interesting.
In my opinion, it's kind of the wild west of data structures. It's whatever the person that's building the solution decides to do. There's no overarching modeling principles or techniques that are being used to build this thing. It's just a bunch of data, stored in some location that is kind of serving the need that someone is aware of. I would almost say it's often a collection of point solutions. I've got this guy over here we're talking about sales. So I got this guy in sales that needs me to score their prospects for them. I'm going to think about that one problem in isolation, and I'm going to go solve that one problem. I'll get that guy his scored prospects so that they can actually effectively spend their time on the prospects that are most likely to convert. But I'm not building this thing in a way where I'm thinking about that sales problem in a holistic way. I'm thinking about that scoring system, and I'm certainly not thinking about how that relates to the downstream processes that really are part of the whole enterprise to create some type of integrated solution. It's typically point solutions. Now, it is the Wild West, though, so it really depends on who builds the system, how they decide to architect it, and often how it evolves over time. One of the characteristics about ODS, I think, is that there's a lot of nothing's an absolute here, but in my opinion, there's a lot of kind of deleting and starting over. Okay, we tried this scoring system here. That worked out great for a while, but now we actually need to extend this so we can integrate it with something else. Maybe it needs to be associated with our products in some way so we know what to offer those people. Well, now I got a problem because I don't have a foundation here to allow me to go and work with that other data set. I've got a point solution. In technical terms, I don't have the keys that I need to go out and do what I need to do to make that next the next requirement actually happen or deliver the next requirement. So what do? I scrap it and I build it again, build the next point solution. And, it kind of evolves over time and becomes more mature. But because there's no overarching, I guess, modeling technique like you would see in data warehousing, there's absolute, very clear, time-tested, proven techniques on how you build data warehouses. There's still controversy there, and differences of opinion, but there's no question that a data warehouse has absolute techniques that are proven that should be followed. Operational data store is not that way. It's just, again, point solution, build it as you think it should be built, and solve the problems as quickly and efficiently as you can. I actually did a little bit of looking on ODS before this conversation we're having, Alex, and a couple of things I found that stood out to me. I found one post that was saying that an operational data store has the most granular data in it, as opposed to a data warehouse, which I think they said often has aggregated data, and that's incorrect. A data warehouse always should start at the atomic grain and then go up. You don't start at a aggregated grain because then you can't go down. So, and I point that out because from the best I can tell, there's no consensus on what an operational data store
Totally
is.
agree. Yeah. Yeah, I was sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Paul, but this is exactly my strong impression throughout the years. People conflate these concepts, and I think we should remind that to our viewers and listeners. We are talking about concepts and given what we believe is our strong opinions about them and views, and based on our experience, I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I would expect different opinions. And I call that ODS, which probably is what we are calling here a staging area. And
Right.
um, and it's very clear. Sometimes people will even call things that are fairly loosely brought together a data warehouse, uh,
Oh, yes. We
and
we
that's
see that a
okay.
lot.
I mean,
Yeah,
there are no laws governing this.
that's
I
right.
think it just helps practitioners, and especially people that rely on this to make business decisions, to have clear understanding of what is possibly the most organized, easy to understand way to draw lines. But these lines keep moving, one way or the other, depending on people's habits and approaches to solving these problems. So I guess if I were to get a quick summary, an ODS would be a step up in the sense that you are producing more sophisticated business logic, but you're not solving the entire problem of connecting any subject area to any other subject area as best as possible. What I'm trying to say is it tends to be a shortcut type solution where we sometimes consciously choose not to do the complete job, and sometimes it does make sense, does it not? I mean, you technically want not to solve the entire problem because you need something immediately. That's totally
Absolutely.
fine, right?
Yeah, there's good reasons to build an ODS. Maybe it's a short-term problem that is limited in scope. Maybe we're not talking about an enterprise that needs to have a decision support system and all the things that we want to come out of analytics. It's just this one little problem. We're only going to solve this one little problem. We're not worried about it being a throwaway solution if the requirements change. That's not the problem that's not the problem we're trying to solve. And in that case, it might make sense to build a point solution. Another example of why it makes sense is maybe the business knows that they're going to migrate to a different source system. Let's not build a foundation on this source system that's about to be end of life. Let's just build something to get us kind of to that next step, and then we'll move into the more I guess, robust data structures. So there's good reasons to do it. I think there's bad reasons to do it too. Sometimes we just do what we know how to do, right? So sometimes that's the reason we build an ODS and call it a data warehouse, right? And again, it's not to be derogatory. It's just that that's the fact. People do what they know how to do, and sometimes that's what comes out of it is these point solutions. In fact, I can think back in my career when I didn't have as much experience. I've built all kind of solutions that I wouldn't build today. So it's often about just learning and trying to figure out the most efficient way to get to where you got to be. But that aside, there still is there are good use cases for building an ODS, like I mentioned.
Yeah, so we talked about not being a straight line. That's such a strong image. You could, as we try to produce order of things around us, we think, well, let's go step A, then B, then C. And we actually started saying an ODS would be a step above a staging area. It could actually be a
Could be
branch
all kinds of
off
things. Yeah,
the good road. You may go there, come back, and then up to something better, and all
right.
combinations thereof. So, um, and that's actually my question: can you, from an ODS, uh, nicely and smoothly and in organized fashion, get yourself up to data nirvana or a proper data warehouse, or you may have to backtrack from an ODS if you want to go all the way to the most robust solution possible.
I mean, it's hard to answer, of course, because the ODS is kind of an ad hoc thing. But in a lot of cases, an ODS does involve a staging process because an ODS has to acquire data, from the source system at some point. And if they're doing that acquisition, the initial extraction without doing manipulation to the data, then we can potentially reuse that staging area, which is going to be needed when we go into a data warehouse. Now, as soon as an ODS starts manipulating data, I would say that's throwaway stuff. You can't move that into a data warehouse because it's already violated so many data warehousing principles that it just would be counterproductive to try to reuse that, I guess.
That's very interesting. I think our main conclusion is they should be approached with caution. If you overinvest and realize eventually that that's not where you want to land, that may be throwaway work, and well, nobody likes to waste resources.
Yeah,
So they should be carefully evaluated. I think the whole advantage of discussions like this is to try to understand the whole journey, right? We talk about, oh yeah, I mean, I want to get to that point. No, I mean, that point just doesn't produce itself. That
right.
point needs to be carefully, and I'm going to go back to the key notion we've been discussing here: architecture. What is an architecture if not a plan? Right? Yes, it's usually we
Right.
think diagrams, but essentially is, well, this is what we want to do, and then with engineers we're going to say, well, how to get there. But that sort of implies that, well, if you want this big amazing thing, it's going to take a number of steps. What are they? So
Right.
ODSs are they can be incredibly useful, but you need to evaluate carefully how long you're going to stay there. Otherwise, it's going to feel like you wasted time and money. Would that be fair?
Yeah, some of the steps are forward, some of the steps are backwards in this process. I think it's no different from if we did system of record reporting, right? That system of record reporting may also not be something that's going to be scalable in a lot of cases. So it's going to be throwaway work that you have to redo once your requirements change, and that's no longer appropriate. And then once we go to a staging area, right, that staging area might get us to the next mile. But it's not like typically build the system of record reporting, and then you redirect to a staging area, and then you redirect to an operational data store, and then you redirect to a data warehouse. It could happen that ways, but usually not. A lot of times when we engage with a client, we're trying to assess what they think their requirements are today. And then we're saying, okay, well, great. I hear what you're saying, but then we have to probe, right? We have to ask questions. Well, what about this in the future? Do you think this could potentially be a concern? Or do you want to try to go after this type of opportunity? What does your systems look like today? And how are those working for you and not working for you, so we can get an understanding of what might change on the data source side of things. So with all that information, hopefully we don't have to go from, system of record, staging, ODS, data warehouse. We can hopefully pick the right solution the first time, or if not the first time, get pretty close, so we have something that's reusable, because we have that insight of where we want to ultimately go.
Interesting. In your observation, would you say ODSs tend to grow organically inside, I can't imagine. Well, we got these files, or call it staged data, and some consultant, someone internal, just built something, used a database, did transformations to the point where we have something beyond staging. Um, what in your experience have you seen in terms of how people got to these ODSs?
Oh gosh, I guess I'd just say that it's usually business unit focused type approaches. If it's operations has an issue or marketing has an issue, they find someone that can solve that problem. Um, and then, it kind of grows organically often in that way. Here's the resources we have. Here's the skills that we have. Here's a way of solving this problem. I can do it quickly and efficiently. Sounds great. Let's do it. Right. Then now we got that problem solved. Wonderful. But the problem is that as that kind of goes through time, you do run into other challenges. Again, assuming that your requirements change, your data sources change, which they absolutely will in 99% of the cases, unless you're going out of business. So knowing that change is on the horizon and not planning for that change is going to present problems. And the way people often try to solve those problems is, I think, looking for other tools to solve the problem, right? So now we've got this unconventional data structure over here that's just completely ad hoc. How do I get that so that I can, well, let's talk about the problem we talked about. How can I actually solve that problem where I don't have the keys I need to actually, integrate this data properly so it can actually serve up the new requirements? Well, then you go to, sometimes people go to tools. Maybe they're going to buy a data virtualization tool, right? So they can kind of, in my opinion, put a Band-Aid on the instantiated structures that are not properly designed. We're going to virtualize that in a way that kind of masks that problem, right? Instead of actually building something that supports the requirements, we're going to virtualize it as something that looks like we're supporting the requirements. Not that data virtualization tools are a problem, don't get me wrong. They can be great. I'm just trying to describe how the journey goes. You get to a point, you hit a wall. What are we going to do now? Well, I don't want to refactor all this thing. I don't want to admit that I didn't have the foresight to see this was coming. So how can I keep going down this path? People are often resistant to that, change, and saying this is not a good route. Let's refactor. So they might Band-Aid it by putting these other solutions on top of it.
Yeah, and some themes are just so recurring. We talked a lot about the need for it comes down to people, and you just brought one that I think it's central to everything, systems in general. Um, you have to design things for change. Um,
Oh gosh, yeah.
that must be number zero assumption is how this design handle change, sometimes dramatic change. Um, it's less critical for transactional systems where you can assume you're going to be operating in a certain way for, I guess, long enough. It is almost impossible for anything that involves analytics because analytics is not just trying to capture one aspect of the business, is everything. So you may have changing marketing, you may have changing HR in production, any area of the business, and your ability to continuously monitor and produce reports out of the business is completely dependent on the ability of that architecture to respond to those big changes that are inevitable. So I think we are, as we reach the end of our session today, a strong conclusion for me at least, I'll let you share yours, is that ODSs can be very useful but need to be carefully evaluated. Um, with respect to potential change and how long that investment will be bearing fruit, because otherwise, just the idea of a throwaway tends to irritate people quite a bit in business. What do you think, Paul?
Yes, no, for sure. And I think this is not isolated to ODS necessarily, right? The concept of planning for change. It's in my top three reasons that these whole solutions fail is the failure to plan for change because
Hmm.
it is coming. The change is coming, and if we build things that are not capable of changing without throwing them away and starting over, that's not going to be wonderful when we get to that point where change is essential. And that goes really down to I guess our fundamental beliefs. Like you mentioned, analytics is not something that you can set and forget it like the old rotisserie oven, right? It's not the set it and forget it approach here. It has to change. So planning for that change, thinking about these solutions as a business function, as we always say, not a project, is fundamental to success. So I think that's a key that spans not just ODS approaches, but all approaches to building these data structures that support analytics.
All right. With that, we come to the end of one more episode. We'll see you next time.
Okay, take
Thanks.
care.
Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. In our next episode, we'll continue the data architecture series with an in-depth look at data warehouses. See you then.